All right. Welcome, everyone. We are grateful that you have joined today's Debrief and Next Steps webinar for the Clean Energy Access for All Design Sprint that took place a couple of weeks ago. I'm Alan Gunn. I helped organizing the event and was delighted to work with so many amazing and inspiring participants. And what we want to do today is update you on what has happened in the time since we were all together in Fremont, California. Uh, we are here today to really review what's happened, but also to give you a sense of how it is that you can stay involved with us. We really, really appreciate everybody who made that day such a productive and healthy gathering. What I'd like to remind everyone is that our webinar is being recorded, so be mindful that questions posed later in the webinar will be a matter of somewhat permanent record. But in general, what we hope to do today is give you a brief overview of what we did during the summit and let you know what comes next and how you can participate. We will be grateful if you hold questions to the end. So we've got a really wonderful slate of folks here to share stuff today. As I mentioned, I'm Alan Gunn from a nonprofit in San Francisco called Aspiration. Julie Noblet is here from Acterra. She did all the heavy lifting to make that sprint happen, and it's a delight to be working with her, as well as Nancy Grove from Acterra. Debbie Mitels, thank you for joining us from the Peninsula Interfaith Climate Action. And Matt Maroney, Raise Green. We're glad you're here and excited to hear what you are going to tell us about. And with that, friends, I think I might just invite Julie to take on over.
Thank you very much, Gunnar, and welcome to everybody. Let's just jump right in. If you're on this call, you either attended or were interested in outcomes from an event we organized on October 18th called Clean Energy Access for All, a design sprint on funding models. So first of all, let me answer the question you might have. What the heck is a sprint? This is a term that is very common in the tech world and not so commonly applied in our world, but essentially it's a one-day intense gathering of people to prototype solutions on something. And in this case, our topic was making clean energy accessible to everyone. Now, this event was really inspired by something called the Giving Code Report that came out in 2016 that asked the question, how can we get all of that Silicon Valley innovation and money to reach local communities and the organizations that serve those communities? And Acterra's particular lens on this is to really make it faster, easier, cheaper for all of us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. We're very concerned about climate change. If you read the paper today, you saw a headline article in the New York Times, scientists calling climate change a speeding freight train, which is particularly scary as that scientists don't usually speak in such stark and alarming terms. But we know we have an imperative to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at home, at work, and on the road. That's what Acterra focuses on. We know too that low, middle income, disadvantaged communities suffer disproportionately from the effects of climate change. They're most in need of clean energy solutions and are sometimes not in a good position to get them. Another question we had at the sprint was, what do we really mean by clean energy? When we say clean energy, what does that mean? It means energy from sources that are not oil, not coal, not fossil fuel. Instead, clean energy sources are renewable. They're things like solar power, wind, geothermal, hydro. And those clean energy sources manifest themselves in our personal lives as things like electric vehicles, solar panels, energy that comes from community choice energy suppliers like Silicon Valley Clean Energy and Peninsula Clean Energy. And so we want to make it possible for everyone to have access to that clean energy. We're not going to move fast enough if it's just the people who can afford Teslas or solar panels or whatever who can avail themselves of this. We need clean energy to be available to everybody. So that was the problem that we were gathered to talk about. This gathering was made possible by a number of terrific funders. It was essentially a grant from the Packard and Heising-Simons Foundations, a call for solutions that we responded to, and they generously selected our particular idea of having this sprint. It was also underwritten by the Sand Hill Foundation, by the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and then we were hosted by 42 Silicon Valley, an amazing coding university here in Fremont. Hosted us for the day. So who was there? We convened 42 people from 33 organizations, public agencies, community-based organizations, foundations, grassroots organizations, all really, and you can see the passion in everyone's faces here, passionate about and you know, with an ability to act on creating clean energy solutions for everybody. We can send a list. Because there's so many, I'm not going to mention them all, but I want to mention a few so that you have a sense of who was there. Rising Sun Energy Center, Green for All, Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, Local Clean Energy Alliance, Stop Waste, Ecology Action, County of San Mateo, Co-op Power, who came in all the way from Massachusetts, Elevate Energy, Green Lining Institute, Habitat for Humanity, Grid Alternatives, Build It Green, Revolve, El Concilio, and foundations, Sand Hill Foundation, the Rachel E. Golden Foundation, innovators like Raise Green, Cross Pollinators, Elemental Accelerator, Menlo Spark, and many, many more. So if you're interested in knowing who all was there, we can supply that list for you. So we broke up this day into three main pieces, and our job number one was exploring the landscape. So all of these people broke into these 5 groups to these were facilitated sessions that were designed to kind of level set our understanding of the issues from the point of view of key stakeholders, community members, and by the way, I should have almost the most important stakeholder that I should have mentioned in the previous slide were community members from East Palo Alto and other communities that could directly benefit from our work were there. It's very important to have their voices in the room. So we laid the groundwork for you know, what challenges are faced by each of these groups: community members, community-based organizations, policymakers, what are some of the emerging technologies that are coming that will help, and then of course, business models and funding strategies. Part 2 of the morning was then to go on from there and a session called Mapping What We Know. And here we were trying to aggregate all of the information that would help us during the actual design sessions in the afternoon. What are the ingredients that will help us? We did stakeholder mapping, more on business models, metrics, which we're going to hear more about, policy barriers. What are some of the policy barriers? How emerging technology can help, and then resource gaps. What is it that we know we should be doing, but we don't have the resources to do it? And then finally, in the third part of the day after lunch, was the main reason we were there is to conduct design sessions. So we had 10 of them that emerged from the morning work that designed to help us move forward on this goal of clean energy for everyone. The 10 ideas came out of where was the most heat from the morning sessions and the most interest. People were allowed to propose one they really wanted to do, and so we did them all. There were fantastic ideas that came out, and at the conclusion of the day, we collected ideas for follow-up action. There was a clear desire to continue the momentum and leverage the ideas and the partnerships that were formed on that day. And so it was our intent from the beginning that follow-up action needed to come out of the day, that we wouldn't just leave it here. So therefore, with this webinar, we're really delighted to announce the formation of 4 working groups that we hope will make it faster and easier for you to achieve your goals in your own work. We know that everyone is really busy. The idea of another working group can seem daunting, but our goal here is to form the working groups around things that you're already working on. Because one of the outcomes of the day was that we agreed working in silos won't move us forward fast enough. We go a lot further when we go together, and it was clear from the day that we are working on similar things. So what I'm going to do is turn the microphone over to a few of the participants who were here, who were there that day, to tell you about these working groups and give you a sense of what they are going to be like, and hopefully you'll consider joining one yourself. So let me first turn it over to myself, because I am going to talk about the storytelling working group. I am really excited about this one. I think this cuts across everything that we do. What you see here in the picture is Michelle Romero pointing at the flip chart there. She's Deputy Director of Green for All, part of Dream Corps. She's the one who facilitated this design session at the Sprint. And our goal was to figure out what kinds of messaging work best with the varied stakeholder groups that we need to talk to about this important issue. And so what we did during the session was we prototyped one stakeholder group. We said, okay, what about sort of the general public, people who don't think about this normally? Who are we talking to? What do we want them to do? What do we need them to recognize? And you know, what can we say and how should we say it? So we prototyped that. Obviously, we need to go a lot further. We need to break the audiences down. We need to create a shared set of talking points that community-based organizations and communities can use when we're communicating with funders, with policymakers. So I think this group can produce something really useful with the expertise that we have. We have a bunch of people who have already indicated their desire to be part of this group, and I'm really excited to see what can come out of it. There was an additional group facilitated by James Cunningham at Grid Alternatives, talking about how we can get voices of the community members included early. They tend not to get to the table early enough, and so that'll be part of that too. So that is the storytelling working group. I hope I've persuaded you that this is a worthwhile thing. You know, our working goal is to make it easier to communicate the importance to everyone. The outcomes could be a set of talking points and best practices for getting communities to the table early. The working group will own its own, can adjust this and own its own product if it needs to. So let me turn this over now to Nancy Grove, who will talk about the metrics group.
Thanks, Julie. So our group took the slightly different approach of how to measure impact from the storytelling group. We think that it's very important to be able to tell our stories as community-based organizations, and at the same time, it's important to take a more quantitative look to try to develop metrics that are feasible for our organizations and at the same time are meaningful for funders. And so our kind of mandate or aim was to align metrics for funders and CBOs. And I think that this is important. It's useful for funders, clearly, because they have to make decisions about resources, but it's also useful for the community-based organizations as we seek to find ways to partner better together. So we know that every nonprofit struggles with how to measure its impact. When I think about metrics, I think about two extremes. There are the things you can measure that are easy to measure but don't mean much. Like, for example, how many people do you send your newsletter to? That would be an example on that extreme. At the other extreme, you have the high value metrics that are directly related to your mission, but are oftentimes very difficult to measure, particularly because the outcome you care about, your organization has one input into, but it's pretty hard to say how much of that impact they're directly responsible for. So the sort of current thinking around best practices is to focus on what we call intermediate outcomes, which are both measurable by the organization, but at the same time have some reasonable attribution. In other words, you can say with some reasonable certainty that your organization had something to do with the outcome. So an example of that might be if you had an EV workshop like we do at Acterra, and you send questionnaires to people a couple of months after the fact to determine if they actually bought an EV or not. So you can't, in that example, you can't attribute 100%, but you can have a reasonable assumption that there was some degree of causality. So this was what our little group talked about, ably led by Susan Wright, whom you see in the slide, of Ecology Action. Susan couldn't be with us today, but Susan, I hope you listen to this so you can hear our shout out for a great job. We wanted to add the concept of not only high value metrics, but consistent metrics, this idea that we find some standards that will allow us to roll up impacts from our organizations and also give useful quantitative information to funders. And the one that kind of rose to the top for us, although this is not set in stone yet, and we look forward to input from other potential members who will be joining us, the idea of finding ways to roll up and measure total greenhouse gas emissions. And so there you've got two issues you're dealing with. You've got the issue of attribution, how much of our action at my organization is directly related to the impact that we saw happen. How much is the workshop related to the purchase of the electric vehicle? That's really a sticking point, very difficult to get to, but there are best practices out there. And if we all agree to kind of do this the same way and make it very transparent, I think that could be very exciting. The second piece is, once you buy and drive an EV, how much CO2 equivalents does that reduce in the atmosphere? And that one's actually a lot easier. There are a lot of tools out there that allow you to make those conversions, but I think another activity of this group will be to review what's out there and pick tools that as standards that are best for all of us. So that's what we look forward to doing. We have committed members already, and we hope that some more of you on the call or listening later will join us. It's particularly valuable to have input from funders because we're trying to design so that we have a good communication between organizations and their funders. So please give us your thoughts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Debbie to talk about policy.
Thank you very much, Nancy. It was a really great workshop that we had, and I wanted to also give a thank you to Jasneet Sharma of San Mateo County, who led the first session where we were exploring the environment of what are the policies that are out there. And then I facilitated the second discussion where we talked about what we wanted to see happen, as well as what were some of the barriers. Our goal really was to look at the policy barriers to clean energy for all, and then define good policies that now exist in other places and identify a wish list of policies that would really make clean energy access for all the reality that we want to see. Many of the policy barriers that we found include rules and processes for government funding, and those often apply also to private foundation funding as well. These policy barriers include all kinds of bureaucratic procedures from local cities all the way up to the California Public Utilities Commission. And there are things like, the short funding cycles for grants, or the 20% local cost share that nonprofits can't find. And neither implementers nor low-income communities are typically represented in the policymaking bodies, and that's a big barrier as well to really coming up with good programs. For example, the cost effectiveness calculations that are often required don't really take into account the high cost of outreach to low-income communities, and that needs to be a part of funding. Or another example, the capacity of subsidized solar systems that can only substitute for current demand rather than the full electrification of a household that we might want to do to get away from using fossil fuels. So some of the exemplary policies that we brainstormed included things like more support for electric vehicles, such as building codes that would require EV charging for every unit in a multifamily complex. So-called cities that have reach codes, which is another way to call stretch goals that really go beyond the required state codes for buildings. Ideas like on-bill financing, a requirement to upgrade buildings at the time of sale, capacity building for CBOs they can apply for low-income access programs using the cap and trade funds. Another idea that was very popular was virtual net metering, which is a terminology to describe programs that let people make small investments in collective ownership of large-scale photovoltaic investments. Mostly, I think it was important for thinking about prioritizing the needs of people who need it the most, basically to be putting our cap and trade funds to those needs of low-income communities. Some of the other wish list ideas was to create a comprehensive program, not siloed efforts, to deliver quality, energy-efficient housing to all. That's a real stretch goal. Including transit in the programs that are being funded, because that's an important part of energy use reduction. And to do things like waiving the vehicle license fee for electric vehicles purchased by low-income people. Maybe also to have zero-interest public loan funds for community energy programs, and require energy storage for larger developments. There are many more terrific ideas, and I think this task force will have a great opportunity to work on them as we start to think about what do we really want to put in this list of policies that we would present then to local governments and up to our newly elected governor. Why not? So we really want to invite people to join us. We have a number of people already committed to working on this from San Mateo County, the Green Lining Institute, and Rising Sun, and we hope to engage many more of you. Julie's going to outline a little bit more at the end the participation time requirements and how you can get involved. So we'll pass it on now to Matt.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I was just thinking to myself how excited I am to be with you all again, even if it is virtually. The energy that was in that room is palpable, and I'm excited to continue it here, talking about the funding and business model working groups. So the biggest goal was to say, how do we build all this? How do we build our dreams? Ultimately, it comes down to dollars and cents. And so what can we do to basically, we broke it into two working groups. The first was kind of what we're calling like a financing resource guide or a tool. That was something that came up in many different sessions, which is how do we know what's out there and who qualifies? And how do we keep this updated on a regular basis as policies and programs evolve? So we broke it down into the types of finance. So you have public finance, things like PACE, the federal investment tax credits and accelerated depreciation, state programs like cap and trade, single affordable solar homes, and concessional loans. We also talked about the philanthropic space, looking at grants and education, in-kind contributions, and donation-based crowdfunding. We looked at kind of impact investing, things like low-interest bank loans, CDFIs, and cooperatives, and how to access tax equity benefits from investors for these types of projects. And finally, the kind of private side in terms of in-kind contributions and also equity crowdfunding. And taking those kind of 4 buckets of financing, we applied them to different personas. So people like what would a renter qualify versus a school or a community-based organization? What would a business qualify for versus a municipality? Because we had a wide range of folks in the room, each representing different stakeholders, each that can access different pools of capital. And then we broke for those personas kind of what barriers exist to allow ready access, things like property ownership versus renters, financial literacy, tax appetite for taking advantage of the tax benefits, permitting and legal and zoning, creditworthiness, and kind of bureaucracy as a whole, which can slow down projects to a fizzle. So our next step is kind of a gap analysis, building out a user experience in a way that makes this readily accessible, and financial literacy glossary. So that's kind of what we imagine that end being. The other side, the other working group that relates was kind of what we're calling the open solar database. So to do renewable energy project finance, to make a solar array or small wind farm, you need a whole suite of documents under what's broadly known as project finance. These documents are typically kept well hidden by lawyers who make them their livelihood, as well as other business consultants and accountants that keep these documents close to their chest. But what we've been developing is a set of open documents, and we hope to build out almost like a wiki where community projects around the country can submit their legal documents so that other groups can take them, use them as templates, and hopefully reduce the barrier of entry that comes from building out projects like this. So we've had some exciting partnerships kind of emerge. We've been working with some folks here at Yale and some folks at MIT who are interested in basically helping to build this out. And we hope to have these kind of 2 aspects combined in a way in the working group to see where people's interests are and help kind of refine where it could be most useful and to whom, and getting that out there. So that's going to be the goal of our working group. We invite you to come and contribute, whether if it's directly with your knowledge of individual programs that you've experienced, documenting shortcomings, or simply learning about these resources and applying them. Really, I think that when coming together and kind of contributing this knowledge for other people to use, we can have real kind of multiplicative benefits across communities, not just in Silicon Valley, but across the country as well. And so I'm very excited to kick this working group off, thanks to Acterra and all of their logistical support and vision for making this happen, as well as the workshop itself. Okay, great. And so next up, I'm going to talk about the white paper, which it's really been a pleasure going through and reviewing everyone's inspiring visions for what the future could be. So I'm just going to quickly run through the topics here, just so you can get a feel. We took the format of the workshop and basically adapted it towards 5 kind of high-level topics. So we're breaking it down into communities, into emerging technologies, into business models, metrics, and financing. I was really glad to hear the working group talking about high and low value metrics, because that's something that's resonating strongly in the paper. There's a strong focus on communities and how community-based organizations have used certain effective policies on a state, city, and national level, and certain kind of policy options and broader policy goals and challenges that exist. In terms of the emerging technology, we're going to kind of document some innovative software and hardware startups that we've seen that would be interesting to kind of offer up collaboration opportunities for. On the business model side, we're talking about kind of the evolution, really spurred by the giving code of, how can we, for Silicon Valley parlance, how can we disrupt the nonprofit worlds in a way that can we make benefit corporations that kind of serve a similar purpose but can take advantage of tax benefits? Can we have for-profit arms for nonprofits like the Habitat Humanity does with the Restore? And how can we tap into donor-advised funds to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy, which we know is an attractive investment across the country for corporate partners. So it's certainly a attractive investment opportunity for philanthropic and community foundations. We go deep into kind of all of the metrics that people put out there and kind of rank them on economic metrics, social metrics, low value versus abstract metrics. How do you measure pride in a community, right? These are things that are difficult to describe, but are important to kind of think about what can we specifically measure, because the number of subscribers to a newsletter doesn't equate to the number of solar installations. Then we quickly do kind of a summary. We're going to be summarizing the intent of the working groups and offer another invitation to participate there. So I'm happy to, if anyone is interested in reviewing the draft and offering up some comments, there will be opportunity to do that. You can either email Julie or myself. The best email for me is greenisagoodcolor@gmail.com. Once again, that's greenisagoodcolor@gmail.com. Shoot me a note or shoot Julie a note. Let us know if you're interested in reading through and making some comments, and we'll do our best to get your comments incorporated before the paper goes out at the end of the year. So once again, I'm very thankful and appreciative, and again, excited to be on the line with all of you fellow dreamers and doers.
Thank you, Matt. And as if that wasn't a good enough list of post-event outcomes, there's even more to tell you about. There was other great work that came out of the summit, and it was captured in transcriptions of flip charts from the Post-it notes we posted and everything else that we sketched out. And we are curating that and want to make it available to folks, who are working on the working groups as they need it. For example, there's a lot of additional interesting documentation on the emerging technologies, on the stakeholder mapping, on the resource gaps, on strategy for community energy co-ops, on the roadmap to a model for green community. So we really encourage you all to reach out to us. That information is available on request. Participants, I think, from the event have already seen a link, but there's lots of great ideas there. And we really do want to make sure that the work that was done at the design sprint has as much reach and benefit as we can. So that is just a summary, a teaser of what else you might be able to check out. We're so grateful that you're with us on this webinar. We'd love to share these other resources with you if they sound compelling. But we're not done. We're carrying this forward, and I'd like to toss it back over to Julie to tell us about next steps.
Yes, and so let me just say thank you to the speakers. I am totally blown away by what we were able to generate in one short day, and by the passion that's going into these products. I just can't wait. I can't wait for next year to see what's going to happen. So this is my call to you, to a warm invitation to join a working group. Now, you may be asking yourself, what am I signing up for? What is the time commitment here? So our vision is that there would be one phone call per month from January to June 2019, with the goal that the group can determine. We have suggested a goal and possible products for working groups, but it is up to the working groups to determine what is in scope, what's feasible to take on in that time frame, what would be most useful. To make it easy for you, Acterra is going to supply logistical support, meaning we'll send out doodle polls to help schedule you. We'll set up the Zoom meeting session that you can use, so you don't need to have webinar software or meeting software. And we'll distribute a summary for everybody of what happened every month in those working groups, so you can kind of follow along, and if something starts to emerge that interests you, you can jump in. So we're also going to create a mailing list for that purpose, periodic updates on progress. You might occasionally also hear from us things we think you might want to know. We know you get a lot of emails, so just very judiciously, if something very significant emerges that we think you'd want to know about, we'll let you know about it. So if you are interested in joining a working group or being on the mailing list, just email me at julie.noblet@acterra.org, and I will put you on that list. So what I would like to do now is open up the floor for Q&A. You may have questions. You have two options for questions. If you look in the bottom center of your screen, you should see a little Q&A icon. You can click on that and type your question, or in that same panel, you have the ability to raise your hand virtually. So if you raise your hand, I'll unmute you and you can just ask your question out loud for everyone to hear, and we will do our best to answer it. So while you're thinking about whether or not you have questions, as I don't see anyone raising their hand or entering a question yet, I'll mention that there were some FAQs that came out of the sprint session that day. I think 9 of you asked, are we going to do this again next year? Can we have another sprint? Can we have Gunnar? Can we do a check-in? And the answer is totally yes, if we can get funding to do that. So I would love to do this again, I think, as a yearly event, especially in this period where, as I mentioned at the top of the call, we need to move fast. So I think that would be a fabulous idea if we can get it funded. Another frequently asked question was, how can we include more stakeholders in this conversation? We had a really nice array of people in the room, but how can we get more young people involved? Should we get schools involved? What about more grassroots organizations, international organizations, utility companies, solar installers, tech startups? We had representatives from most of those groups, but how do we get more people involved? And I think that's a great question, and I think it's a fabulous question for working groups to ponder as part of what they do from January to June. This is one of the things that our storytelling group was really very concerned about, is how do we all speak the same language? I think we often find as community-based organizations go into communities and start talking about the things that excite us, like metrics, and it does not resonate that well with community members. What are you talking about? And the same thing with community-based organizations and funders, kind of a different language. And so how do we level set that language and make sure that we're really truly speaking to everybody? I think that's a very interesting and complicated question. So I'm going to pause. Those were the two frequently asked questions I heard, and I welcome any questions this group may have about what happened, how you can get involved. And I will fall silent and let you raise your hand or enter a question on the Q&A. Okay, well, seeing none, we'll let you ponder, and please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email me at julie.noblet@acterra.org, or Matt, how can they reach you again? Maybe Matt is on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. You
Okay.
caught me. It's greenisaggoodcolor@gmail.com.
Green is a good color@gmail.com. Love that email address. Okay, any last comments from any of the panelists?
I'm wondering, Julie, if the report that comes out, the white paper, what plans are made to send that to local elected officials, both at the city and county level in the Bay Area, and also perhaps to our state legislators? Any thoughts about that?
That's an excellent question. So our plan was to make that white paper publicly available. And I think that would be a fantastic thing for the policy working group to think about, is who needs to see that paper and how do we get it done. Does anybody else have additional comments on that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. You know, I think that kind of since the sprint, there's been some really exciting kind of murmurs about this Green New Deal. And I think that, this sprint is kind of one of the things that has to happen for the Green New Deal. And I think passing that along to Cortez, and as well as all the other Democrats that have been, speaking up and speaking out on this Green New Deal, certainly is something that we should think about.
Love it.
I would add, Matt, I think that you're entirely right along that idea, because so many of the ideas that were expressed as sort of the stretch goals or the wish list were the kinds of things that were being talked about that new Green Deal, both including the energy efficiency issues as well as the income inequality and needing to serve all of the citizens. So I think it's a really good idea.
Awesome. Okay, and we do have a question that came in on the Q&A chat from Kirsten Andrew Schwind. A suggestion for metrics group, if not already taken into account: national tools for measuring impact of energy actions involving electricity usually reflect national averages for carbon intensity of electricity mix, which is much dirtier than our local mixes. Your local CCA or provider can provide carbon intensity figures for your energy mix that are specific to the region. It may dramatically change the results of the analysis and decisions about which steps are most effective. Very interesting.
So I'll take this one, Kristen. I love this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is the kind of deep dive I really look forward to our working group taking into the tools that are already out there. You are absolutely right. National tools reflect national averages. They don't have much to do at all with what we are experiencing and using in the Bay Area. There are as I mentioned, a variety of tools available that do look with a very highly granular scope on on local geographical use and energy sources. And I am sure the group would do that. That's a little bit in the future, but I am really glad that you bring it up, because that shows there's interest in grappling with these things, and I truly hope you decide to join us. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other, oops, there may be another here. So I'm using this tool for the first time, so let me just make sure I've got all of the, yeah, no, I think that's it. Yes. Okay. Let me then issue a last call for questions or comments. And if hearing none, I'm going to give you back 10 minutes of your day and finish just a little bit early. Let me just join all our panelists in thanking you so much for making the time to be here. And Gunnar, do you have any last comments?
No, I would just echo your thanks, and I look forward to the work ahead. Thanks to everybody who's following up and helping to make this essential work move forward in so many ways.
Thank you, everybody, and see you again soon, I hope. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.